Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to be adding Power Beyond to this Oliver 1650. This applies to most all the 50 series and basically any Oliver with open center hydraulics. If your filter's here, you've got open center hydraulics. If you got a cover like this. But I thought I'd go over how this system works and what makes it open center and everything and what we're doing here before I start pulling plugs and everything. And your reservoir's down here, your dipstick's here, and the pump's submerged down in the oil inside of there. And so there's gears that come up from the shaft that drives the PTO, come up here and drive the pump. Pump is actually right on the other side of this cap here. And the intention of this cap is a second pump. Could be mounted. I've never seen it done, but I've talked to guys that were around back in the day and saw one or two of them done that way. Mount a second hydraulic pump on the front here. It would have to be compact to miss the shifter. But anyway, so the pump's in there, pumps oil up, and over here on the other side is the relief valve. That one right there. Okay, here's the relief valve, and all it is a spring and a plunger and some shims to adjust it. And when it's set properly, most of these 50 series were 2050 psi, and then it starts opening, and that's to prevent from too much pressure building up in the system. So it's a safety device. So from there it goes into the filter. Come back around the other side. Okay, you got this here is a filter bypass. So if your oil's really cold and thick and it can't push through the filter, it will bypass it. So you still have hydraulics. And then the book shows you taking this plug out to drain the hydraulic system. And let's just say that's a pain in the butt. Don't even mess with it, because usually these plugs are in there pretty darn tight. Just get a hose to go into a coupler on the back, an open-ended hose with a tip on the other end, and plug it in and just hold a remote lever back, and when it starts sucking air, you're empty, and shut the tractor down. That's the best way to pump them down, in my opinion. So anyways, you got your filter bypass, and if you don't change your filter often enough, it can crush down, and then it'll bypass the filter, and you're pumping dirty oil around and around and around. So change those filters. From there it goes back, comes into this, the priority flow divider. This is for the steering, and there are two plugs on here. There's this one, which is the pressure setting, and the old Saginaw steering unit was a maximum of 1500 psi. Early steering unit of these were down around 1200, and they did boost the pressure up to 1500 later on. There's different colored springs for different pressures. And if you want to check it, there's a plug right here. You screw a gauge into that and run the tractor and see what pressure you're reading. You got to steer it at the same time to generate, or to get the resistance, steer it all the way to the end. And that'll make the pressure kick up. And then if you need to add or remove shims, you take this cap off and do that. So it comes into this. And then on this back cap is a spool, and that's your flow divider. This divides out 5 gallons per minute, roughly, to go to the steering. Goes down here, goes onto the floorboard, goes up in the dash for the steering, and the open center tractors, then goes up to the oil cooler in the front, and then returns back to the reservoir right here. And sometimes if your steering all of a sudden doesn't work, this spool here, which is taken out by that cap in the back there, can get a fleck of something in it and get stuck, and it will keep the oil from going to the steering. So an easy way to check if that's it is hold a remote lever back or forward or whatever, deadhead it so that the pressure builds up. You got to have nothing hooked to it or at the end of a stroke of a cylinder or whatever, but that'll create enough pressure to open the relief valve, and that back pressure will push back through this priority valve and push oil to the steering. And so if you get steering while you're holding one of those levers back and creating back pressure, then it's safe bet that this spool in here is stuck. You just need to take that cap off the back, and I do believe it's a threaded spool where you can thread a bolt into it and pull it out and then buff it up and clean it up, make sure it slides smooth in the bore, and then put it all back in with a spring and everything the way you found it. Took it apart. That could be a video for the future. But what that spool does is all the oil comes into here, and it makes sure this gets the first 5 gallons per minute roughly, sends it to the steering. And then whatever's left over, if there's enough flow, it pushes that spool back and it goes in and comes into the cover here. Now this is a good way to tell if your hydraulic pump's getting worn, because you'll have a case where maybe you got to rev up to 1200 or 1500 RPMs to get the rest of your 3-point and your remotes to work, but the steering works all right. Well, that means this valve is actually doing its job, because it will shut off the rest of the hydraulics to make sure your steering has oil pressure as a safety feature. And so if your pump's weak enough that it can't generate the 1500 PSI that this relief valve is set at, and is demanding all 5 gallons of oil to make that kind of pressure, it shuts off the flow to everything else to make sure you can still steer. And when you rev the tractor up, the pump output increases and you get to where you're putting through more volume, and then that spool can shift and start delivering some to the 3-point and remotes. So it's a pretty safe bet if you're getting that where you don't have anything but steering at a low RPM. Chances are your pump's getting tired, especially after the oil warms up. It could be a low pressure on the relief valve, and that'll probably be another video to discuss how that works. But so oil comes from the priority valve back into the hydraulic unit here, goes back, feeds the remotes, comes across, goes back down to feed the 3-point hitch, and then from there it returns to the hydraulic unit or the reservoir, and that's all internal. So what we're going to do is bypass that, sort of. So I got to take this plug out, because just behind it is where the oil comes up in and goes back. And I also have to take this plug out. This one is going to be where my pressure comes out to go to my loader valve. And to keep the oil from going through its normal way, there is a 3/8 pipe plug threaded holes back in here. And you stick that back in, put that 3/8 pipe plug in, and that blocks the oil from being able to go from this point to that point. So now it has to come out here, go to your loader valve, and then when it returns to your loader valve, you put it back in here, which returns the oil to where it was going to go in the first place without that plug in the middle, and it can go happily along its way to feed the remotes and the 3-point hitch. And on this particular valve, we got what do we call I don't know if you call it a dump valve, but a waste valve. But there's going to be 3 hoses in this setup. And the third hose is just the fluid that comes off the cylinders, off not the pressurized side, but the return side. Rather than trying to feed that into the pressure line that's coming back here and make for erratic loader work and the remotes and stuff, I'm going to return that essentially non-pressurized oil or low pressure oil back to the reservoir in this plug. And only the pressurized oil that goes through the center of the valve will still feed through and go through here. And that way we're not trying to feed low pressure return oil back in with a high pressure return oil that kind of makes things back feed and not work as good as you want. So I've got the loader valve mounted. This is a Prince joystick loader valve, capable of 25 gallon per minute, and I don't even remember the pressure, but more than enough. That's plenty of gallons per minute for a tractor this size, but the next best thing I was finding was down around 10 or 11, and I felt that was just a little on the tight side. Any restriction causes extra heat and loss of flow, slows down your hydraulics and stuff. So I didn't take a whole lot more money to buy this better one, which is also made in USA, somewhere in there. So for a little bit more money, I got a good valve made in the USA with higher flow capacity, single stick, so we can run the bucket and the loader just one stick, and a float action on the loader circuit that we're going to put in there. So essentially you can put the loader down and it will just float up and down over the ground instead of have pressure. And this bracket here was already on the loader. I believe this is a 1610. I'm trying to remember. Alan said he looked in the manual for what that was for, and I don't recall. But I had a piece of rod around. Hell, heat that up, bent it, had my brother weld on this plate, and bolted the valve on, and now got a lever right up there. This is held in place with a set screw. So if we want to move it in or out for the operator or shift it a little left or right or whatever, just got to loosen that set screw and just shift it around a little bit, and like I say, you can move it forward and back a few inches and custom tailor it. Looks like it's going to work pretty slick. Hey, look at that. Well, one lucky. This particular plug, and usually the factory ones are just, it's a 3/8 square hole. You put your 3/8 drive ratchet or extension in it and screw around out. I'm wondering if this one had been out before in the past, but let's see if the other one wants to cooperate as well. No, it does not. Okay, be good to me. Come on. Whoa. I don't want to break my ratchet. I don't really want to have to put heat to it either. Well, with a big enough persuader, went with a 1/2-inch ratchet with a reducer down to 3/8 and a big old cheater bar, and it's turning. Take this off, I think. Yeah.
It looks really, really nice.
Well, got her. I was beginning to wonder there. That one was in tight. And I got that one loose, so now I just need to find a 3/8 plug to put back in that hole. Then we got to measure and make hoses to reach that loader valve I pointed out before. I wanted to get the loader valve mounted so we knew how long the hoses to make. Okay, I got the plug out, and it's kind of hard to see in there, but there are 3/8 pipe plug threads in there, as I mentioned earlier. So I got plug with a Allen socket type. Oops, I'll pull it off, but because tried one with a square head that sticks out, and the socket that drives that wouldn't fit in the hole. You almost need something like this, so that, because you got to be able to drive the thing. Then you just stick her back in there. I'm not even putting any kind of pipe sealant on it because it's not going to leak externally, and so if a little bit seeps through, it's really not the end of the world. And I don't need excess pipe sealant getting in the hydraulic system, so it really shouldn't be an issue. We'll just snug her up. Don't need to crank it down super hard like some people do to where it never comes back out again. That ought to be good. There, socket came out with all the pieces it went in with. The plug is in there. So now, when the oil comes up from the priority valve, it can't go back to here to feed everything else. And that's why we have to have our hose for our Power Beyond go out and then eventually return back to here to bring the oil back into where it would have normally been. So that's the gist of it, but we'll have more of what we do as we do it. Okay, we're going to drain the hydraulics down because the one return line goes in the side up in there, and it's below the level in the hydraulics, so we don't need oil going everywhere. So we've got a bucket here, a good clean bucket, and I just have a hydraulic hose. I keep a tip on and open on the other end, and you just plug it in, and I'll have Alan get up there and start tractor up and hold the lever back, and when it starts sucking air, shut the tractor off, and we got her pumped down. Or if the bucket gets full, which it shouldn't.
You ready?
Yep. See if them battery cables are on good enough. Working. The 3-point hitch came up. Go ahead and pull that inside lever. Other way. Oh, I'm sorry, right lever. My bad. Other way. Other way. There we go. When it sucks air, be ready to shut it off. Well, there's nothing coming out, so it must be done. So go ahead and shut her off. Usually it gets a little more whiny than that when it's
Yeah, I was listening real carefully. Really.
Yeah, kind of the old closed center tractors. You'll hear them rah, 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 and you shut them off right away. But this one, usually you kind of hear some noise, but it didn't seem to. But well, anyways, so that's dripping into the bucket there. I guess we could just disconnect it like that, and then we'll put the cap back on to keep any dirt out. But the good news is my temporary plumbing for Power Beyond worked. I got it plumbed right. We used an actual Oliver swivel right here. It's normally on a hydraulic right here, so we could spin that in without having room. So that goes into the hose here, goes up to the loader valve. That's why the 3-point hitch didn't come up right at first. I had to push all the air out of everything. And that's probably why we didn't get a full, closer to 5 gallons out, because we had to fill hoses and stuff. But the oil went up there to the loader valve and then came back in here, and then once the air was pushed out, 3-point hitch came up and the remotes worked. But we're going to put this bypass type thing on because that will help with smoother and faster loader operation, which requires a third hose. And we're waiting for a fitting to show up, but we can at least get the hose in there now that we've got the reservoir drain down. So we'll do that next. Okay, we had to do a little heating there, so we did a little repainting, but that plug was stubborn. But we got it out, so we got a return line in. So now we just got to go put the loader back on. Got all the stuff stitched up over here. About the biggest thing, I'm waiting for a fitting to come that's supposed to be here today. For the, right now we're using the bypass return as everything return. It'll work, but it'll work better once we have the third hose hooked up. I'll switch this one up here, and then this one here will go there, because this is the one that goes back to the reservoir. And that's what this port does, is just the return oil from cylinders that's lower pressure comes into this, and so that should help make the loader work quicker and better. Moment of truth. Got the hydraulics all hooked up. We're gonna see if loader works, and if we hook the couplers up in the right direction. Those will be easy enough to switch if we didn't, but let's see. Is it in gear? You now have a neutral safety switch.
That's right.
Well, that one's right. Yeah. Got the bucket backwards. We can switch that. No. Is it? I would have done it the other way, but if that's the way you want it. steer. Fingertip steering. Well, it's all hooked up. Right now we don't have the bypass hose worked up, and it's actually working all right that way. Don't know if it necessarily, I'm going to still hook it up when that fitting comes, and we'll see if that changes loader performance. But right now the loader seems to work nice and smooth, no jerkiness. Still run the 3-point hitch up and down while you're running the loader at the same time, steering, all that good stuff. So that's the ins and outs of adding a Power Beyond. Say pressure out, plug in there, pressure return, and then basically a bypass port. Yeah, we've got the hoses all made and everything, so I'll probably just hook that up and go with it anyways. But we'll see how well it affects performance when that fitting finally gets here. Well, Amazon came through. Got the Power Beyond adapter that's threaded in right there for this particular valve. And so now this is the one that goes back to feed the rest of the hydraulics on a tractor. And then this is just the exhaust port for the cylinders on the loader. And it definitely works better with it on that way. Before I couldn't do the bucket and the boom at the same time. And now I can, and also just acts like the loader cycles faster. Rev it up just a little bit, and it was going up a lot faster than before. So maybe I'll have Alan get on and do a quick demonstration. There we go. His tractor's ready to go. Go push some snow and scrape snow. Got a fresh clutch. Brand new Saginaw power steering. Power Beyond, so you can have the blade working off the back and the loader on the front without switching things around. Hope you found this video helpful and enjoyed what you saw. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.